This is the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game.
Rule number one is you have to believe in yourself. You're the only one who doesn't think you belong in this appointment. The prospect has already validated your existence by scheduling time with you. Get it through your head you belong here, go in there, crush it, and close the deal.
A place where sales professionals can come to learn from other sales professionals and thought leaders that have mastered their craft.
The difference between a good salesperson and a best-in-class salesperson is only 2 minutes. By spending an extra 2 minutes on what you might think is a mundane task in the sales game, you separate yourselves from the pack, you grow your book of business, you close more deals, and you retain your accounts.
As well as their peers who are still striving for perfection to achieve their why.
I have a wife and 4 kids. Failure is not an option.
Real sales professionals, real stories, real results. Are you ready to feel the power?
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. Today, we brought somebody from InsurTech or the tech world in general in, Mr. Jacob Simon from Adapt API, fresh off a trip to the Hawksoft User Group Conference in Texas. I wasn't there. This is probably the last year that I will not go to that conference. We will probably have a contingent there next year so that we can canvas everybody's breakout sessions for what they want to learn the most. Here's the thing, man, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on this, Jacob. Like, I haven't really been to any other user group conference. We're certainly Hawksoft users here. I was blown away at how big that thing was, man. That's what she said. But I was seriously that blown away. Like, there was so much going on simultaneously. And I saw that same feedback again this week. And I mean, I got a lot of rave reviews back from people on different breakout sessions. Peggy Corbett being one of them. Not that I'm surprised. Peggy's absolutely fantastic, which is why we use her at Florida Risk Partners to keep us on the straight and narrow, because, well, we need handlers here. So
that's for sure.
Anyhow, before we get up and running, why don't we spend just a couple minutes, Jacob, giving everybody your background and kind of what led you to where you're at right now with Adapt API, and then we can dive into all of the world's problems that you're solving.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on the podcast, David. Appreciate you and Kyle having me. Yeah, you know, my background's more in the tech world. And I kind of stumbled into insurance, which is, you know, what most of us do. But I had a friend who'd worked in the industry, and he just kept telling me, hey, man, you got to go like spend some time in insurance, learn how it works. I'm telling you, you know, there's so many problems there that you could go and solve and help build technology for. And I kind of was like, yeah, I don't know, you know, for a long time, for probably a year, he's telling me, badgering me, you know, you got to go check it out. And so finally I took his advice. You know, I just got hooked. I spent some time with a couple agents, spent some time hanging out in their agencies, just, you know, watching kind of how they spend their time, where their day goes. And, you know, I just kept seeing this same pattern over and over again, which is, you know, somebody in the office logs into a carrier website, you know, has to search around to find a document or go to a generator report to pull it down so they can figure out what's going on with their book of business. And this was happening, you know, at every agency that I went in and spent time in. And you see it once, you think maybe, you know, there's a better way to do it. They just don't know about it. You see it twice, you know, you think, okay, maybe there's a pattern here. And by the third time in a row, it was pretty clear to me that this was just the way things worked. And that was kind of an opportunity. And so really what we've done with Adapt API is we are, you know, automating a lot of these repetitive tasks, these things that are, you know, steps 1 through 10, do the same thing every single day. We do it for you with software so that, you know, you can focus on the actual like relationship driven and insurance side of the business, which is, you know, why I usually got into it to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my question. What's the difference between that and robotic process automation? Or is that robotic process automation?
It is, yeah. So the technology.
I got to be really clear, man. These agents out here, they want to throw acronyms around, like API and RPA and all of this stuff, like they know what it is. When in reality, we don't. We just heard somebody else say it, and we think that guy's cool, so we want to sound like them, so we'll say it too. but there's like, that's kind of like a new buzz right now, right? Like it's not limited to what you're doing. I mean, I've seen like fragments of it in other applications as well. So
API or robotic?
The robotic process automation.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a ton of it now, and I try and skip over that most of the time because that's just the tool that we use, right? But what matters really is what's the problem that we're solving. But it has seemed to become a little bit of a hot topic over the past certainly a couple months, maybe 6 months. But really, it's just a very flexible tool that allows you to teach software how to use a website, right? That's the simplest way to describe it. So if you have and many agencies have this, they have like a workflow document of, hey, go to these 10 websites every day and do these 10 things, right? You can actually turn that into code. And so that it runs automatically instead of a person having to do all those clicks. The robot, so to speak, does it. And so that's really robotic process automation, RPA in a nutshell. And there's a whole host of different applications people are using it for today. When ours is just one of those.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of people will complain that would like eliminate their job. Their job is to go into all these sites and pull reports and, get loss runs and do this or that or whatever. I would have to imagine that there's a little bit of pushback as far as that goes.
Yeah. It's funny because you would think that, but some of our biggest supporters are actually the account managers of the agencies that we work with. Mm-hmm. Because, let's be honest, none of them got into the work and their favorite part of the day is where they go in the morning and spend an hour clicking through websites, right?
Yeah.
Like no one's energized by that. No one likes spending that time. You're always worried about making a mistake, trying to figure out, hey, did I do this yesterday or not? Right. These are all just things they have to do, but not necessarily get value out of it. And it's certainly not furthering them in their career. Right. And so what they can do once, their agency is working with us is they actually get to spend that time on things that add value both to their career and also to the agency, right? So they're actually out talking to the customers. They're doing things like cross-selling. They're doing things like coverage reviews, things that rely on that insurance expertise that they've been building, rather than, this like, click this document, open it up, rename it because the name doesn't make any sense, right? And then drag it into the management system, which, you do enough of those and it becomes pretty boring.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is we need to be focused on revenue bearing activities anyhow,
right,
so that we can continue to grow. And a lot of this stuff, it's mundane work, man. And if you could get, like, I'll be honest with you, it's more punishment than a job to me for a team member. I don't know very many people who want to sit and do the same thing over and over and over again every day. So if there's a way that you can use technology to solve that problem without having to put a human body there, I'm all for it, man. I realize the industry at large probably still is a little slower to adopt, but it only takes a few early adopters to have success and get out and start talking about it. And then it takes off. So before we jumped on to record, man, you said you were at Hawksoft user group, and there was a lot of buzz there because of a two-way integration. Talk a little bit about what you're doing specifically with Hawksoft right now. I mean, our listeners should know we're huge Hawksoft fans. We appreciate them. That's the only management system we've ever used in our agency. And as far as I can tell, probably the only one we ever will use, because there's no real reason to move things around for no reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I will say is that conference, by the way, is like truly something special. And I know you mentioned that you're going to take a contingent down there next year, but there really is this kind of like familial vibe to it. And people genuinely come there trying to learn, trying to better their agency. And so it's kind of awesome to see that, and just free flowing sharing of information, what's working for different people. It's again, kind of a very unique thing that's awesome to be a part of. And then with respect to us, I mean, Hawksoft has been a just fantastic partner. So the way our two-way integration works is, so, we're going and pulling these, documents, these notifications, things like notice of cancellations, claims, transactional documents that don't download, things like endorsements, audits, renewals from certain carriers. And so, without Hawksoft integration, then we pull that information, but someone's still got to enter it, right? Mm-hmm. But with the Hawksoft integration, this becomes totally hands-free. I'm talking, you sign up, you sit up with us in 30 minutes, and the next day we start uploading all of that directly to Hawksoft. So, a pending cancellation comes in, you're going to see a log note, a suspense, an attachment right on the policy. An endorsement comes down, attached right on the policy. So this becomes like a truly kind of autopilot type of integration, where all this repetitive work is just gone. And again, you can kind of like refocus your efforts on the things that are going to add value to the business, as opposed to this like repetitive, mundane work.
Well, it also gets rid of the human error type, of situation that you run into. Because it's like, while it's not that big of a deal to move stuff over to Hawksoft, of course it takes time and all that, but it like, think of all the different types of attachments and endorsements and stuff that you just rattled off. Like one of those, two of those, however many slip through the cracks, like that's very easy to have happen, especially if you're doing several, dozen of them every day.
Oh yeah. And especially if you're doing it from, 10, 15, 20 different carriers, right? Just
Right.
like the chance that you're going to miss something, mess something up, it just, continue goes up. And it's certainly with a lot of the larger agencies that we work with, this becomes a daily occurrence, right? That they're getting a notification of, hey, or someone's reaching up being like, hey, this document's wrong. This is labeled wrong. This is in the wrong place. Hey, we just missed this cancellation because, it just slipped through the cracks. And so the ability to do the fully automated integration into Hawksoft means that, you don't miss these things anymore. If you want someone to see it, we'll set a suspense. But just even for record keeping purposes, it's all in there in the right place, and you don't have to really think about it. And so you're right. That becomes a pretty significant factor, especially, as the agency starts to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you educate agents that don't understand what you're doing? How do you get them to realize, wow, this is actually something that makes sense?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing is trying to understand kind of how they solve this problem today, right? And so I'll just ask them, say, these things that aren't downloading, right? Like things that download, great, it's in your management system, but the things that don't, how are you dealing with that, right? And it's usually one of three things, right? You have someone, in-house who's going and grabbing that information for you. You have someone outsourced that's doing that for you, or you're just not doing it and it's kind of flying blind, right? And most of the time, you should probably be looking for it, but you only have so much time in the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? And each of those has its own pitfalls, right? Obviously having someone in-house do it, or having outsourced VA do it, similar problems in that that human error we talked about is a big factor. Also, again, it's not exactly motivating, developing work for anybody, right? So if you're trying to give somebody a career trajectory, like that's not it, right? And so on either side, that kind of falls down a little bit. And then of course, if you're kind of flying blind, right, it feels like it's okay in the short term because you're not paying the cost, but then you miss a cancellation, then you start seeing this on your retention numbers, right? Because you're missing cancellations or even renewals, right? You just like didn't go and check, and the person actually would have taken the renewal and they didn't take it in time, and now rather than it just being like accepting a renewal, now you have to actually reinstate them on that policy. And so once you understand kind of like how you're solving this problem today, and then take a look at, okay, what can Adapt do for me? The kind of like difference becomes pretty stark. And because it's all software, because it's automated, we can do it at a cost that's just not really feasible for a person to do, right? Like you can obviously pay someone less if you go to if you hire someone in a different country, they might have a lower cost of living, but that only goes so low, right? And software can be quite a bit under that. And so basically what we can offer is, hey, we're going to do it, for a lower cost, right, without the mistakes, and also free up that time so that that person who you've already vetted, trained, hired, brought into your organization can actually spend their time doing things that are much higher leverage than this, again, repetitive work.
Mm-hmm. So what's that user experience look like? Like, we call you, you come in, you kind of look at some of the processes or whatever, and we're like, all right, this makes sense. Like, how do we get going?
Yeah, so something that's a little bit different for us versus some other folks who are using, RPA like solutions,
Mm-hmm.
is we don't do custom builds, right? So some of them will say, hey, like bring me your problems and I'll figure out how to solve it, right? And what you'll normally get from that, you'll get, it's like anything that's custom. It's going to be perfectly tailored to you, right? But it's going to cost a lot more, right? So it's not something you're taking off the shelf. You're doing everything exactly the way that you want it. What we've done instead is we've found some of these things that, if not every, certainly most agencies are doing on a regular basis, right? And we can kind of, build it in a very off-the-shelf way, right? So things like going out to carrier websites to download documents every day, we don't need to really customize that so much. There are little customizations like what gets suspensed, who does the suspense go to, things like that each agency can define. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty consistent process, right? And so what that enables us to do is have, first of all, really quick time to value, because you're taking it off the shelf, there's no real like long implementation process. It's usually about a 30-minute setup call, and that's it. After that, you're up and running. And there's a little bit back and forth over the first few months just to make sure that you're kind of using it in the highest value way possible. But at the end of the day, that's about it. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned before, just cost. Rather than paying for the actual, building of it and kind of like that back and forth of making sure you fine tune it to exactly your specifications, because we have something that works for most agents, you're going to be paying just like a usage basis, which ends up being, much, much, much lower than any of those custom build solutions would be.
Gotcha.
So what's the biggest piece of pushback that you get?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I mean, one is really just kind of carrier coverage, right? So we're adding new carriers all the time. And I think this is always going to be a challenge, especially for newer insurtech companies. But, we're at about 40% of the P&C market, and this is mostly admitted lines. But we don't have as much coverage in like the regionals, kind of like certainly not like the small regionals, and Florida. Unfortunately for us, the homeowners market is also not great because there's just all local carriers. But that ends up being, one of the bigger areas of pushback. It's like, oh, well, you have, 3 of my main carriers, but you don't have the other 5, especially if you're in Florida or you work mostly with regionals. But that, I think, is usually the kind of like number one pushback that we get. And that's something that we're, certainly aware of, and we're expanding all the time. We're adding, 1 or sometimes 2 carriers a week at this point.
So you said something interesting when you talk about Florida and working with regionals, because that's more on the personal line side of things. On the commercial side, we're typically dealing only with national carriers, to be honest with you. We just can't package business most of the time because property always ends up in excess and surplus lines. Of the agencies that are working with you now, what's the typical demographic? Like, who's a good prospect for you in terms of business mix and all of that?
Yeah, so usually most of the agencies we work with are, doing kind of at least 500K of revenue. And that's just because we focus on servicing workflows, right? And so you're servicing.
If you're not doing any more than that, then there's no reason for you to be bogged down in all reality.
Right, exactly. And so they're just not going to really see the value until they're that size or even a little bit bigger. And so we certainly focus on that. Like I said, we don't have great coverage in the Florida homeowners market or anyone who works like primarily with regionals. And smaller regionals, we have some of the larger ones, but outside of that, the other thing is more on the, certainly personal lines, small commercial, mid-market, even large commercial is not as much of a fit, just because that ends up being a lot more bespoke, and also a lot lower transaction volume, right? And so they just, again, are getting a little bit less value out of the service that we provide. And then E&S is another area where we haven't really focused very much. So we don't cover many E&S carriers. That's something that we will do in the future. But, essentially, if you kind of don't, meet any of those, I guess, like anti-matches of, smaller than 500K of revenue, mostly large commercial, or, mostly working with regionals at E&S or Florida homeowners, for example, that's usually a pretty good fit for us. And really, there is no cap. We have agencies that we're working with that, again, 500K revenue ballpark, and then ones that are, 100 times that size. And it really, the bigger you are, the more of this work you're doing, right? And so there really is no cap on it from that perspective.
The E&S is an interesting thing to me, because that's right where my head went when we started talking about this, because that stuff doesn't download automatically and excuse me, into HubSpot. So that part I thought was interesting.
Yeah. So
Hawksoft, I mean.
Yeah. And with E&S, and I think that's somewhere that we'll start to tackle later this year. the challenge for us there is that a lot of them also don't even have like a website, right? You know, there's a lot of mails, you know, the some of the more tech forward ones might be emailing you documents, right? But it's just like a totally different form factor for us to kind of process information from. And so, you know, we've kind of left that as one big chunk to kind of bite off a little bit further down the line. And then to your point, the other challenge is the nice thing with kind of like the most of the carriers we work with and the lines that we work with is they will have policy download, but not document download. And what that means is that the policy shell is already automatically in the management system. So when we have these management system integrations like we have with Hawksoft, we can easily find the policy and attach it, right? The challenge for if the carrier doesn't download at all, then there's a question of how much is actually in the management system, how correct is it, right? And we start running into challenges of, you know, there's a lot more fat fingering of policy numbers and that kind of thing. And it makes it a little bit tougher to do that, you know, seamless integration all the way into the management system. So these are solvable problems, but that's some of the things that we're thinking about as we consider when to make that push into ENS versus stay focused on some of the lines that we focus on today.
Well, from scaling your business standpoint too, man, you've got to do what's right for your company, and that's go where there's not that much resistance. You know, going into ENS, that's going to be a daunting task. And I mean, I've even heard from people that you can get Ivan's downloads on ENS. You just have to know, you have to convince your wholesaler to provide it for you. I've never even gone down that road because it just seems like it would be a royal pain, to be honest with you, trying to have to fit. I mean, it's hard enough dealing with ENS when you have to manually do it. Right. I can't imagine if you start getting downloads of various quality coming in, like it's not.
It'd be a cluster.
It would be a cluster. And I mean, I think that if it's something where you were ever able to solve it, it would be a huge selling point for you. But man, what a mountain to climb.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And because of the nature of ENS, I think it only gets more complicated, right? Because everything is so much more bespoke. And so you're right. It is a much larger challenge. It's certainly not the low hanging fruit that the markets we play in now are, or at least relatively low hanging. But to your point, is there's also a lot of value there if we could figure it out. And so, you know, we have a couple carriers there earmarked out as a starting point, and then over time we'll work on figuring out some of that. You know, how much can we get out of what is available either via email or you know, whatever methodology the carrier uses today, and figure out, is there something that's kind of like good enough to actually solve some of the problems you need download for.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like with that, there's so many. I don't know, man. I would have to I'm having a hard time getting my head wrapped around how you could automate very much at all with ENS, just because there's so much manual entry that has to be done on the front end. It's like, from my perspective, and I want you to push back and tell me, you know, what I need to know. Seriously, I'm not saying this to throw shade at you. It's just, I feel like, you know, there's so much that has to be manually entered because of lack of download to begin with. You know, what can we really capture, you know, through an automation standpoint? What am I missing? Because I just feel like once you're in the system, you might as well just go ahead and do it while you're in there. I mean, I don't know that there's an easy way other than that, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. So one is, and we haven't built out this capability just yet, but part is pulling the documents in from email, for example.
That's
part
exactly
is actually
what I was hoping you were going to say, is there was like some sort of I mean, I don't want to say parser because that's probably not the right term, but or is it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, parser works. Yeah, basically we'd pull in the documents from email, right? We'd read out all the structured information from it, right? And so that's how we would actually be able to get all that information that you're probably thinking of for duplicate entry or manual entry today, and then be able to automatically submit it into the management system, right? So now this is a, you know, significant undertaking, right? So this isn't something that, you know, we're going to ship next month or potentially even like later this year. But you can kind of see how, you know, with those components in place, we'd be able to give you that experience that you want, where we have the structured information pulled out of the documents linked to it, and all that information uploaded to your management system, right? And that's really kind of how I envisioned that ENS piece of the business working. But to your point, much more complicated, and it's going to take time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just remember hearing my buddy Raghav Tana from Tarmika talk about what a night. I shouldn't say a nightmare, just what a project it was just to get the API integrations. Because agents, I was being sarcastic when I said it earlier, but in all reality, the average agent running around on the street, yeah, we've heard people say API, but they don't really understand what that means and how many APIs. And I mean, when Rags was telling me like per state, per line, like all of these different APIs that you have to use, it made a whole lot more sense why Tarmika grew the way that it did. I think the number one complaint that I always heard from people was, well, they don't have enough carriers, or, they don't have my carriers. They've only got a few of them or whatever. But I mean, to look at what it takes to pull all of that information in from each of those separate interfaces is just nuts.
Oh yeah.
It is way above my comprehension level.
Yeah, it's just crazy, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, and I don't envy him that challenge, because especially on the quoting side, to your point, per state, per line of business, like it just gets so
like hundreds. Each carrier could have hundreds of APIs.
Oh yeah, yeah, and depending on how you answer certain things, it's going to change the questions from there, right? So you have to have different, like, to your point, hundreds of different kind of like payloads in the end that you're going to want to send to get a quote. And I think this is actually why a lot of just building technology and insurance is a lot more complex than people expect, and why a lot of these companies, as a concept makes sense, but then when actually implementing and trying to build it are very challenging, because there's just so little standardization anywhere of any kind, that if you want to have reasonable coverage for anything, right, you're basically just doing like a one-off build for every single time, right? And so if each of those builds takes like a month of an engineer's time or something, right, even to get to 10 carriers, you're looking at like an engineer spending basically a year building it, right? Not to mention if you want to have like 50 or 100, or like really have like broad coverage. And so I think that's always going to be a challenge, and that's why you have a lot of these things that seem like they should be simple. And even for us, I mean, we're fortunate in that we don't have to get nearly as detailed as Tarmika does, right? Because they're getting like all the information for a quote, right? And so they just have probably 10 times, if not 100 times as much information per customer they need to get to be and to send to the carrier in the carrier's format to be able to actually get that back out. And even for us, being able to just get all these different types of documents and notifications consistently, we're still doing it. Like it's all custom per carrier. There's not like a, once you've built like 30, you can just copy paste and it's done. No, you're still doing like this custom work. And I think that's going to be true up to, 100, 200 as we keep going from here.
It's amazing. So obviously we're not going to ask you to hand out names or whatever, but can you, in broad strokes or generalities, describe like the biggest win you've had for an agency so far that's decided to bring you in to solve some of these problems that they're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we actually recently participated in this accelerator called Broker Tech Ventures.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's a cool concept. They basically have, roughly like 15 large brokerages, 15 large carriers, and they just bring you on site to meet all of them at once over 2 days. And so we're now working with a couple of those brokerages. So these are all, I think like a small brokerage there is probably doing like 30 million of revenue. And the big ones are, whatever, 10, 20 times that. And so we're working with a couple of those right now. We'll probably add a few more. So those have been super exciting. But honestly,
I know my old firm BRP is part of that. I was actually I was the first producer they hired.
Oh, wow.
When we reconstituted back in 2005.
Okay.
Yeah, I was the first commercial producer they hired. So I was there for 2.5 years and loved it, loved working with them, but realized pretty quickly that I needed to go do my own thing, man. I could have been a small fish in a really big pond and had, some level of equity, but I'd rather do what I'm doing now. And that's no knock against them. They run a great shop. Love everybody over there in leadership. They certainly taught me a lot in my time there, but I know they're actively involved in Broker Tech Ventures for sure.
Yeah. I chat with a couple of folks over there. They're awesome. So that was definitely a big one. And honestly, the other, the Hawksoft integration is something that has been in the works for a while. And we launched that about a month ago, but It felt awesome to kind of get that out there, get that in front of people. And the feedback has just been, nothing short of kind of effusive from the existing Hawksoft customers, the ones who beta it with us. We've added a couple more, even in the past, couple weeks since the launch, and continue to add a bunch more now after the conference. It's been awesome to see kind of their eyes really like light up when they see like, wait a second, like this stuff that, used to not download, and I was doing it manually and there were mistakes everywhere, and it just happens. It just works. It's kind of cool to see that, like, light bulb go off for them, and see how excited they get. So that was also a huge win for us.
What's been the biggest learning experience for you since starting your company? I'm sure there's been a ton, but
yeah,
one that sticks out.
I mean, I think the biggest one, and it's funny because this probably sounds simple in hindsight, but everything takes longer than you think. Like whether it's the initial building of the product, or some of these like sales conversations, just hiring. I mean, all of these things, when you kick it off and you think like 3 weeks later you're gonna have it solved. And even when you have that like first conversation, or you have like a great candidate you talk to, or like a great prospect you talk to, there's always things come up. And so it's been kind of like a really good lesson for me to, certainly stay persistent and stay on top of these things, but also to understand that, I guess all good things can take time is the takeaway there.
For sure.
So what gave you the idea, man?
Yeah, honestly, it was just hanging out in insurance agencies, talking to agents, like trying to understand where do they spend their time. It's funny, and some people will say data entry is a problem. A lot of people just say staffing is a problem, right? And I think that
what they really mean is data entry is a problem.
Right, exactly. And that's what I realized over time is you could kind of group a couple of these different problems that people were giving me into, falling into this one broad umbrella, which is, if you were more efficient with your time, right, then some of the staffing challenges go away. Also, employee retention can improve, right? Because, if you're not making your staff do whatever, an hour of, repetitive clicking of document downloads each morning, then there's also a better chance that they're going to be happy with their job and stick around. It was really, and you could argue that I probably went like a little bit too, deep on this, but I basically just spent a year talking to agents, hanging out in agencies, like really getting I was there with like a notepad with the agents I was working with, like, writing down, times, how much time is being spent on each thing, hanging out with the servicing team, the sales team. It was really just born out of kind of that amount of time invested, and really trying to get like very deep into understanding where the time goes out throughout the day. And this just was so consistent that every agent was spending time on it. Honestly, when I first noticed it, it was one of those things where I was like, I must be missing something, right? Like, surely there's a solution out there. Someone else has solved this, right? Because it's just such a huge time cost to so many people, across the entire industry. And the more time I spent on it, the more people I talked to, I realized that, it hadn't been solved. And that's really where I realized, like, okay, this is the thing that I can go and kind of like fix.
What are you most excited about moving forward?
Well, certainly excited about, a couple of these partnerships. Obviously, some of the larger brokers that we're working with now. The Hawksoft partnership is just getting started, and so we just came back from the convention, which we discussed, and then also starting to work with the team there to kind of like put this out in front of more of their customers. And so I'm really excited for kind of like how that will grow and develop over time. I think that's going to be a kind of like a big focus for certainly next few months, but really, for the, looking forward for the company.
I'll tell you what, man, one thing I think that's interesting is we're just now getting agents comfortable with using virtual professionals, right? Like, there's still, I would say 50% or more. I have no mathematical validity.
67%.
Yeah, I'm moving away from the 67 on this. I gotta believe 50% or more of the agencies out there still do not use virtual professionals in any way, shape, or form, and don't feel comfortable doing that. And now
I'd say that's pretty fair. I think it is probably more than that.
It's probably more. But now we're talking about wanting to push them towards using just computer automation. That takes it to a completely different level, man. And, you know, I gotta believe, like, part of me really wishes I was a salesperson for you, because I would love to cold call some of these people and just hear the stories. Because I already know there's a lot of people out there who think that we're literally living inside of Terminator 2 right now. Like, the machines are going to come and get us. You know, now we've got
Damn
ChatGPT.
kids and their computers.
Yeah, it's going to take over the world, you know, and all of that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see. But here's the thing, man, like this, again, this goes back to some of the things that we talk about on the podcast. You know, virtual professionals don't like doing repetitive, mundane tasks either. They just do it because it's the job that they're given. And if you can think outside the box a little bit and how you can use that labor for other things, like I can tell you right now, we're using virtual professionals for video editing. We use it for podcast editing. We use it to create blogs and content and all of that, all on the editing side. It's all of our stuff, but appointment setting, all of these things, those are all things that can bear fruit to the agency. What's not going to bear fruit is sitting there attaching things 24/7, 365. And so my challenge to the agencies that are out there shaking their heads and thinking, wow, this is just a crazy transformation, we just now started using virtual professionals. You know what? Think about it the same way you thought about your virtual professionals. You know, you just have to add another category to the mix now. You know, originally we would sit here and look at a task and say, is this something I need to do? Yes or no? And if it's no, then it's, can I delegate it? Okay. If I delegate it, that's to somebody internally. Can I automate it to HubSpot, or can I outsource it to a virtual professional? Now, it's not just automating that task inside the CRM, but you're able to automate tasks inside the AMS, which is huge. And I'm excited to see, because I know that you've developed this a long way, but I also understand it's only at the tip of the iceberg, man. Like, it's crazy to think that as much as what you've been able to create, and there's other people out there trying to do similar things, and it's the same thing, right? As much as they have going for them, as big of a problem as they've already solved, there's just so much more application to the general concept and use of the tool that who knows where this thing ends up, man. I mean, who knows? Like, I got to believe there's an application for it on the carrier side too that's even bigger than the agencies.
Oh yeah, I mean, and we've very early conversations with a couple of carriers, but yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, like, the bigger an organization gets, the more of this stuff that builds up over time, where you just have these things that have always been a manual process. It's always been someone like clicking a button to do X, generate a report, upload it here. And so there's certainly, lots of opportunities there. I mean, I think taking a step back, just like the broader, I guess, shift towards automation, as you pointed out, like, it's just like another category, right? And so the same way that you think about, like, what's the right bucket to put this task in? Who should be responsible for this task, right? You now have a new option that's opening up. And I think that you're going to see carriers, picking it up. You're going to see agents picking it up. I mean, for the interchange between the two, that's really where we sit. But I think there's a lot of interesting applications. I mean, a lot of the things that you send off to the carrier, also then on their side, there's something that they're doing manually, right? And so if you can kind of fix both sides of it so that there's like a common interface, right? So if you're able to communicate through Adapt, they don't have to have a person that's manually, clicking and dragging on their side either, because you best believe, a lot of the stuff that you submit to them, let's say you submit an endorsement, in many cases, there's a person sitting on the other end of that who's, copy and pasting that into another system, right? And so you can imagine a world where that data flows a little bit more seamlessly, and that's just a net win for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm racking my brain. I had something right on the forefront of my mind, and it slipped me for a sec. Oh, I know what it was. So you talked about the integration with Hawksoft. Are you at liberty to discuss other systems that you're working with right now, or that you're already up and running with?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are integrated with NowCerts. They have an open API, so that was pretty straightforward for us to set up. And then we actually are It's invite only right now, but we have an invite only integration with AMS 360 as well. And
nice.
that's brand new. And so certainly, anyone listening who wants to be invited, you can shoot me an email and you can make the list. But we are keeping it closed for now for kind of like a beta. And then we'll be rolling it out shortly after that.
Nice.
Good deal. What have we missed? I can't think of anything we've missed, man. I mean, I think we've done a good job of talking about the current problem, what you do to solve it, who would be a good agency for you, what management systems you're integrated with. Kyle, can you think of anything else?
No, I mean, how do people get a hold of you? How do they reach out?
That was next. Yeah. How do
Get
they
more
find
info.
you, man?
Yeah, absolutely. So people can email me directly. I'm at Jacob, JACOB at adaptinsurance.com. You can also, check out our website, adaptinsurance.com. And, you can add me on socials, wherever you want to communicate. But people can just email me directly. And I'm happy to set up a time, chat through it. If people have questions, I'm, super responsive. So that's probably the best way to get in touch.
Sweet.
Good deal. Well, you heard it here first, or I don't know, probably third, fourth, or fifth at this point. You've been on a couple podcasts that I've seen, but listen, this guy's out grinding people. If nothing else, respect the hustle. I see him at literally every show that I go to, and he's out there trying to get the word out. So if you're banging your head against the wall because you don't like to deal with mundane, repetitive tasks, and you happen to be on Hawksoft, NowCerts, or AMS 360 for limited beta distribution, I would definitely reach out. This is not, here's the thing. I talk about this and have for a couple of years now. You've got adopters, adapters, and do nothings. Adopters are the people that are on the forefront. They're already in Jacob's ecosystem. They're already using his product. Adapters are the people who see stuff come out and they decide they need to course correct or they're not going to be able to keep up. And the do nothings are probably sitting somewhere thinking about what they're going to get for the Blue Plate special tonight while they're looking at the catalog of company co-ops for which calendar they're going to set out at Christmas this year. So at the end of the day, this stuff is not going anywhere. It's only going to get bigger. It's only going to grow. And I don't know about you, Kyle, but I'd rather be on the forefront of something than let everybody else figure it out. And then I got to jump on board.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you're already, a few steps behind. You got to make up ground. It's not a good spot to be, man.
100%. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this episode up. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Jacob Simon from Adapt API. And he is changing the way we play the game. I hope that you reach out to him if he can be of assistance. And if he is, you need to let me know. I like to circle back when we have positive stories about people we have on the podcast. I want to share it with everybody else and let them know that people are out there winning. We don't just put guys like Jacob on here because we're looking for interviews. We find people that are doing something in the industry that's going to make all of our lives better, and we want to feature them. So feel free to reach out. I look forward to seeing you the next time around. I don't know if you're going to InsurTech Insights in New York or not, Jacob, but I just got an invite from the CEO to go to that. So there's a likelihood that I'll be up there here in a little bit in New York City. It looked like there's going to be a lot of InsurTech companies there.
Yeah, I think we'll be there too.
Sweet.
There you go.
All right, man. Well, have a great week. We will catch everybody else next time. See you guys.
See you.